So my name is Erin Belfort. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I work mostly at Maine Med, where I'm the fellowship training director. Got a few fellows in the audience. Thank you for coming to support, moral support.
Of course.
And so I'm going to talk to you today about social media and risk-taking behaviors in adolescents. I have about 40 minutes of content, including some videos, and I'm hoping that there'll be plenty of time at the end. I'd love to hear from you all what your experiences are working with kids and what kinds of things you're seeing as far as risk-taking behaviors as it relates to social media use. So I don't have any disclosures to make. The learning objective, I just am hoping that you all will leave with a better understanding about the relationship between social media use and risk-taking behaviors in teenagers. And I really encourage you, if you're not already taking a media history, to make that a part of your day-to-day practice. So here's what I hope to cover. We're just going to talk briefly about social media. We could spend a whole hour and really get into the weeds about particular apps. And I find that that's less helpful because there's no way any of us grown-ups can be ahead of the kids in our lives, whether you're a parent or a clinician. So I think it's important to know a little bit about sort of categories of apps and categories of websites. But really, I would encourage you just to be curious and let the kids you work with sort of be your teachers. So we'll talk about how adolescents are using media. Again, what is that link between social media and risk-taking behavior? If there's time, we'll talk about taking a social media history. And then, as I said, I'd love to have some time at the end just for some discussion and to hear about cases. So, many of these are probably going to be familiar to you. Does anybody know this one on the left? Facebook. Okay. I used to do this with white-haired psychiatrists, at these national meetings, and they didn't know what Facebook was. So it's kind of come a long way since then. Generally, the audiences know what these things are now. So in the middle is Twitter, of course, which if you follow anything presidential, you know about Twitter. Anybody know the one on the right? Google Plus. So these are all apps that are really made for social networking. So you can generate a profile, you can post content, you can connect with friends and followers. Some of these apps are more likely to sort of contain known friends or followers, so kids really use Facebook more with people they know in real life or offline, whereas Twitter, lots of kids are using Twitter more to kind of follow their celebrity favorites or their favorite band or something like that. So these are examples of micro-blogging apps. Does anybody know this one on the left? Musically, nice. 2 points for Brandy. So I spent some time with it's called Musically, and it's a lip-syncing app. It's very popular with kind of tween girls. So I spent some time with a friend's 9-year-old daughter who loves this and spending hours on Musically. You can record yourself lip-syncing to whatever song you want and then send your music video to all your pals. So that's Musically. Does anybody know the one in the middle? Instagram. So it's a pretty common, popular one. Most of these can be linked to each other, so you can post your Instagram pictures also on Facebook. And then, of course, Twitter, which is both social networking and it's considered a micro-blogging app because you have a content limit, so you can only post a 140-character tweet. So has anyone heard of these texting apps? So these are just a few examples: Kik, WhatsApp, and GroupMe. I think the appeal for a lot of kids is these don't rely on cellular data, so they're Wi-Fi enabled, which means kids can text until their hearts are content. The messages are also a little more easily hidden because they don't sort of pop up on your screen the way your device's text messaging system works. So a lot of kids use these apps, and these apps, most of them are free. There's a lot of in-app advertising, and there's a lot of in-app purchases. So So people can purchase fancy emojis, some of which are kind of adult-themed emojis. And so that's one thing that's appealing to kids. So there's a variety of these secret apps. Probably the one you guys will be most familiar with is on the left. Anybody know that one? Snapchat. So this is a pretty popular one with young people. And so with Snapchat, you can send an image to a friend or a group of friends, and they have, I think it's a 10-second limit, or you can set the limit for how long the recipient can view the image, and then it disappears like a ghost. A lot of kids have been burned by this. So Snapchat is used for sending sext messages, so sexually explicit messages, because people think, oh, well, they only have 10 seconds to look at it, but there's plenty of ways around that.
You have 10 seconds to take a screenshot.
Exactly, 10 seconds to take a screenshot, right? So once it's out there, it's out there. In the middle here, has anybody ever seen this one? I hadn't heard of this one actually. This is called Private Ninja, and it's a spy cam, basically. It allows you to have your phone appear to be off, but it's actually video recording. And so it's important just to know that these things exist. I mean, there's a whole lot of these. The one on the right is calculator %, so it looks like a calculator icon on a phone. It looks very benign. No parent would think there's anything kind of suspicious going on with this app, but it's actually a password protected kind of hidden photo vault. So for kids who are kind of getting in trouble with sexting, sometimes this is sort of the app that they would use to store those kinds of images on. So there's lots of video apps as well. So YouNow and Lively are live streaming apps, which some kids really like. Vine and Vimeo are places to sort of post short videos. And probably many of you are familiar with YouTube. You can find just about any content you want on YouTube. I would say one of the most popular professions I hear these days when I ask kids, what do you want to do when you grow up, is I want to be a YouTuber. Like, this is how they're going to make their livelihood. Some of them really think that they've got a chance. So it's also important to know about these chatting and dating apps. So these are designed for adults, but lots of teenagers use them. And most of them rely on having location services sort of enabled, so that if you have a Tinder account, it's going to find you other Tinder users within a certain radius. And so people sort of, photos flash across the screen, and people can sort of swipe right or swipe left. And the idea with many of these is that you're going to meet these people offline somewhere. So they're sort of hookup apps. Which obviously is of concern when you're thinking about teenagers and how vulnerable they are. So it's important just to know about these. So Tinder, Meet Me, Hot or Not, and Scout, just the bottom right. So this is just a graph of 13 to 17-year-old teenagers and what are their favorite social media platforms. So this is 2015 data. I haven't seen anything more up to date. But 71% use Facebook. It's not necessarily the highest frequency social network site, so lots of kids have Facebook accounts but aren't necessarily posting or using it a lot. About half use Instagram, 41% Snapchat, 33% Twitter and Google+, 24% Vimeo, and 14% Tumblr. This is some data from Common Sense Media. So the Pew Center and now Common Sense Media do these big reports looking at kids' media use every couple of years. So this is the last one from 2015. And they reported that American teens use an average of 9 hours of media a day. And that doesn't include school or homework. So it's an incredible amount of media that young people are using, which makes it really hard to answer that parent question, which is how much is too much, what should the limits be? So it's very kid dependent how you answer that question. So this slide is a little busy, you probably won't be able to see it all, but the point is just that media diets, so to speak, really vary pretty widely among teenagers. So on the far left are the light users, and that's about 32% of kids who are using 3.5 hours a day. And then moving from left to right, we have readers who primarily use devices to read. We have gamers and computer users, social networkers, which represent about 10% of teens, and they're using 9.5 hours a day. And then the heavy viewers, so all the way on the right, represent 26% of teens. So it's a pretty high number, and they're engaging in 16.5 hours a day of media. And that includes music and YouTube and Netflix and sort of all the things kids are using. But they're almost constantly connected. So, a lot of times parents think, well, I'm just going to tell my kid they can't have this. They can't have social media, they can't have internet, they can't have sort of this crackdown. Let's just limit everything. And that can really backfire sometimes because this is part of the social capital and kind of the social fabric for teenagers today. So I think ultimately our goal is to help them not make terrible mistakes and bad decisions to begin with. But if that cat's already out of the bag, how do we help them make better decisions and be good kind of digital citizens over time? So if you work with kids, you sort of learn all of these very intricate rules of social media. So I'm just going to show you this little video. Wired magazine did a nice article about this maybe about a year ago.
On Instagram, don't post photos of food. That is something that you can put on your Snapchat stories, but if it's something that no one really cares about, don't put it on your Instagram because people are just going to get annoyed with your account.
On social, I never post like millions of selfies in one day because I know that bothers people.
Even on Snapchat, if you post many times a day, it's kind of annoying. Once a week, maybe. No, once a day, just not like 10 times a day.
It's the thing I'd never post on social media is make a photo of myself.
One thing I would never do on social media is post a nude, whether it be my own or somebody else's. I think that's a private.
Deleting comments is bad because they know that they didn't want that there. I deleted comments. Yeah, I deleted her comments. I've had friends that text me later, which is formal, of like, why'd you delete my comment? And you're kind of uncomfortable situation.
I got my dad on Snapchat, but I never contacted him. I had posted something on my story, and he saw it, and then he commented on it, and he sent me a direct message, and I just blocked him after that.
My parents don't follow me, but I follow my parents. Same.
My family members don't need to see what I be doing.
So there's this really interesting culture that kids are sort of learning about what do you do and what do you not do on social media, and many of them really step in it in various ways. Probably many of the kids we work with clinically are the ones getting into some trouble. So who knows what this stands for? Yeah, fear of missing out, FOMO. It actually made it into the Oxford Dictionary in 2013. So they define it as the uneasy and sometimes all-consuming feeling that you're missing out, that your peers are doing, in the know about, or in possession of more or something better than you. Under this framing of FOMO, nearly 3/4 of young adults reported they experienced the phenomenon. And so have you all seen this clinically? These kids who check compulsively their feeds, their text messages, they're in session with you and they can't put their phone down. I think it can make some kids, vulnerable kids particularly, the ones we work with, pretty symptomatic. Really can generate a lot of anxiety, despair, hopelessness, this constant fear that their friends are doing something without them. So it's a good thing just to know about and ask kids about when you're working with them. So CNN did this report a couple years ago, maybe a year ago, about being 13, and they looked at the social media profiles of the 800 8th graders, and they followed their posts for 6 months. They looked at over 150,000 teenage posts, and they found that the heaviest social media users checked their social media feeds more than 100 times a day. So again, just this compulsive checking and constantly rechecking. And, most schools have no cell phone kind of rules, and kids are clearly getting around those rules if they're checking 100 times a day. So just to give you sort of a flavor of what some of the kids said in these focus groups. So I would rather not eat for a week than get my phone taken away. It's really bad, said Gia, a 13-year-old. I literally feel like I'm going to die. When I get my phone taken away, I kind of feel naked, said Kyla, another 13-year-old. I do feel kind of empty without my phone. So again, whether we like this stuff or not, it's here to stay. Kids are really feeling quite dependent on it, and I think it's our job as parents and as clinicians working with kids to kind of help them find some balance, some middle ground. So what is the link between mental health and social media? There are virtual communities online that support, normalize, and encourage many risky behaviors, including eating disorder behavior, non-suicidal self-injury, pro-suicide behavior, and substance abuse. And some of these social media sites and apps really allow a forum for cyberbullying and sexting, and particularly the anonymity aspect of some of these forums. So many of you have probably heard of kind of the pro-ANA or the pro-MIA, pro-anorexia, pro-bulimia websites. There still are many, many out there. This is a Thinspo gallery for Thinspiration. And so generally these kinds of websites attract typically young girls and women who are struggling with eating disordered behavior. And so when they need a little extra help with their restriction or their purging or whatever their symptom is, they can go online and read things like, make them regret the day they dared call you fat, because the pain of looking in the mirror hurts more than starving. And there are just tons of pictures of very emaciated young girls and women, some of these coveted things, collarbones, hip bones, thigh gap. There's a lot of discussion about these sorts of features and how these are the sort of goals, right? So these are not sites encouraging help-seeking behavior or healthy eating habits, which also do exist. These are really websites that trigger and worsen and sort of help solidify symptoms of vulnerable kids. Anybody seen this new Netflix movie, To the Bone? Yeah, a couple? I'll just show you the trailer.
All right, ready? $2.80 for the pork, $3.50 for the buttered noodles, $1.50 for the roll, and $75 for butter. It's like your calorie Asperger's. That's not breakfast. It'll be there as coffee.
You do a lot of sit-ups. I'm not going to treat you if you aren't interested in living.
Good speech. And bottom under control. Isn't it funny? Piece of cake. And bottom under control. And bottom under control. You okay, honey? I just got up too fast. So, welcome to our new house member, Ellen. Hi.
Oh,
How you doing?
I'm not gonna lie, I'm really fucking hungry.
Like a ghost. I feel kind of angry. It's my life, too. I don't get to have a sister.
What's going on with you?
I just don't see the point. People say they love you, but what they mean is they love how loving you makes them feel about themselves.
I don't even know where to start with that. There's all kinds of wrong.
The way that you're going, one day you won't wake up.
I can't stop.
Every time you hear that voice, I want you to tell it to fuck off. Fuck off, boys! Somebody tell me why we're here!
That's where I'm alive.
Very good.
Some of them actually seem like they're doing okay. Like they might get lives and be semi-interesting people.
Did you just say something optimistic?
I did say semi.
So you have to get past Keanu Reeves as a psychiatrist. But it's actually, I think, reasonably well done. You know, this main actress apparently had an eating disorder in her own teenage years and lost a ton of weight to play this part, and certainly looks the part. And they leave you sort of with a question mark at the end. It's not clear, does she get better, does she get past this or not? It's kind of a helpful message at the end. But there have been a few kind of reviews from the mental health community that have come out about this. Again, it was just released in July. This is sort of an interview with an eating disorder therapist and a patient struggling with an eating disorder. And Katie, the patient, says, "Yes, To the Bone is triggering. The film To the Bone got my attention. It was unnerving to see an actress that skinny. It didn't feel competitive necessarily, but it was scary to see that things can get that bad. I would suggest that you consider not watching the film if you struggle with feelings like not feeling skinny enough or not feeling good enough." So again, important just to know if kids that you're working with who are struggling with eating issues are watching this stuff and kind of engaging in this kind of content. So moving on to these communities that support non-suicidal self-injury, you go to YouTube and Google like cutting or self-harm, self-injury, you just come up with tons of these videos of people actively cutting, burning, doing various self-injurious behaviors. And a Lewis study kind of did a content analysis of these and found that they're usually viewed by young girls and women. They have very high viewership, so a lot of people are watching these videos, and generally they're positively rated. So on YouTube videos, you can sort of give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and you can comment. And in general, these are well-liked videos. Another study has found that adolescents who self-harm have higher rates of internet use. So the caution that I guess I would put out as I go through the data is that we can't jump to a causal association. We can't say, you know, media is bad and media is causing self-injurious behavior. I think it's a complex relationship, and what's more likely is that the kind of kids we all work with who are vulnerable and struggling in some way prefer and gravitate towards these kinds of sites and this kind of content. This is about sort of wallowing in and continuing one's symptoms and not really about help-seeking behavior. So this is a video, Hannah Vancouver, who's a YouTuber. This was a couple years ago. She posted a 14-minute monologue about how to hide self-harm from your parents. And you can see she's got a lot of subscribers, like 56,000 people are subscribed and watch her channel. Almost 183,000 people had seen this video, and the vast majority, over 3,000, gave it a thumbs up. So there's a lot of this kind of content out there, which again, sort of vulnerable kids might find their way into. So this post was from a couple years ago. I went back to see what Hannah Vancouver is up to these days, and I couldn't find the old video, and I did find this video about getting rid of old videos, mental health update. The good news is Hannah Vancouver is doing a little bit better, and she's explaining why she took down some of her old videos. And interestingly, many of the comments say, "Give us your old videos back." People want to see some of the old struggles that she was dealing with. So a related phenomenon are these online suicide sites. There are many of them. There are social media sites, chat rooms, forums, and discussion sites. Often these are anonymous and kind of unmoderated. And several analyses have shown that there are as many, or probably even more, suicide prevention sites as the pro-suicide, but the pro-suicide were more popular. So again, it's not that there's not also good content and help-seeking content online, it's just that these vulnerable young people can prefer and find themselves in these websites that encourage and glorify their symptoms. So this is a study looking at where young people learn about suicides and whether that has an influence on their own suicidal thinking. And they interviewed young people a year apart, and they found that if you learned about suicide on a social networking site, so if you found out that a classmate had committed suicide on Facebook, you didn't necessarily have higher suicidal thinking a year later. But if you found out about a suicide on a discussion forum, which is generally kind of an anonymous place, you were more likely to have elevated suicidal thinking. So the theory, or the hypothesis, I guess, is that social networking sites lead to greater exposure, but also greater connectedness. So most people are on Facebook, using their real names and their real pictures and have at least some real kind of offline friends they're connected to. Whereas these forums really promote anonymity and may encourage suicide behavior. Some of these sites, there are comments sort of egging suicidal people on, telling them just do it, and pretty nasty stuff. So again, they're not kind of encouraging help-seeking behavior. So cyberbullying is another related phenomenon. This is when cyberbullying either directly or indirectly is linked to suicide. And a survey of 2,000 middle school children found that victims of cyberbullying were about twice as likely to attempt suicide themselves, and offenders were 1.5 times as likely. So both offenders and victims of cyberbullying may be at risk. So it's important to sort of think about cyberbullying with the kids you're sitting with and asking them both about, are they on the receiving end, and might they be on the other end? Might they be offenders as well? So this is sort of a link to that sort of idea of cyberbullying and also about contagion. How many of you have seen 13 Reasons Why? Yeah. So I think in maybe a week I saw 3 or 4 teenage girls, and I know my colleague Rouse Gerwin, who works at the Children's Hospital, saw several overdose attempts. And when we sort of asked kids, like, why now? This kept coming up, 13 Reasons Why. I saw one teenage girl who'd been very stable, no depressive symptoms, ready for college, and came into my office acutely suicidal. And it turned out she had binge watched this whole series of 13 hours of content, and she watched it all back to back to back. And so I was curious enough that I decided to watch it, and I didn't binge watch it, for the record. It took me like 2 weeks. But let me show you the trailer.
Hey.
Hannah, I'm not going. Not now. Not ever.
Why didn't you say this to me when I was alive? My husband and I, we never got a note.
Hey, it's Hannah. Hannah Baker.
Holy shit.
Settle in, because I'm about to tell you the story of my life. More specifically, why my life ended. And if you're listening to this tape, you're one of the reasons why.
Is Hannah telling the truth?
Don't believe everything you hear.
Whatever Hannah thought she saw, she lied about it on those tapes because she's a crazy drama queen who just killed herself for attention.
Hannah had secrets, Mrs. Baker.
Hannah's secrets are what killed her.
Maybe I'll never know why you did what you did. But I can make you understand how it felt.
You don't know the whole story.
What else do I need to know? You're just like the rest of them, but I'm not. Everyone is just so nice until they drive you to kill yourself. And sooner or later, the truth will come out.
This is a wild game of survival.
So, I intended to watch one episode, but it actually was pretty compelling and also very disturbing. There's been a lot of mental health folks to sort of write op-eds and things after this has come out, and a lot of schools have done kind of warnings and sort of in-services. It's kind of generated quite a big reaction. So the protagonist, Hannah Baker, is a teenage girl who's very beautiful and appealing and charismatic, who commits suicide and then tells you the story about why she did it. And she left a series of cassette tapes, essentially blaming 13 people for her suicide. So it gives teenagers sort of this idea that you can have this ultimate revenge fantasy, right? She's talking from beyond the grave and sort of romanticizes this idea of suicide as revenge and getting the last word. Kind of you see these kids listening to their tapes sort of in misery as she explains to them what they did to her that led to her death. And it tackles some pretty significant stuff. There's cyberbullying, there's sexting, there's sexual harassment, there's sexual assault, some of it pretty graphic. Her ultimate suicide is very graphic and very disturbing. And I think what troubled me and others who I've talked to the most is that it doesn't promote help seeking. It makes it all seem very inevitable. And adults are either absent, disinterested, or completely ineffective. So she does try to reach out to, I think it's either a high school guidance counselor or a school social worker, it's hard to know. And he's so distracted, he's on his phone while she's trying to ask for help. And so there's sort of this hopelessness about it that I think is pretty disturbing and really has affected a lot of kids, probably some of the kids you all work with as well. So this is a letter kind of in response to this that came out in JAMA Internal Medicine end of July. Internet searches for suicide following the release of 13 Reasons Why. And it's kind of a busy graph, but the bottom line is they looked at suicide searches online in the days and weeks following the release of this series, and they found a 15 to 44% increase above what they might have expected. So that translates to 900,000 to 1.5 million more internet searches for suicide than you might have expected. So it's pretty significant.
Did they look at actual increase in attempts or successful suicide?
Not that I know of. But I know, my colleague, Dr. Gerwin, this is sort of anecdotal, but she saw, several pretty serious attempts. Some of whom, ended up in the ICU or at least on the Children's Hospital for some days while they cleared, where they, cited this as probably one of many precipitating factors.
And they're making a second season.
Yes, I've heard that too, making a second season. Yeah. Right, despite a lot of kind of outrage and feedback. And I saw an interview with the producers where they said, we want to break down stigma and raise mental health awareness. I mean, that was, I think Selena Gomez was one of the producers, and she talks about how that was her intention, but it was just so missed the mark. And they've gotten a lot of feedback. It's good drama and it's good TV. I'm not sure they're going to make any changes the next time around. So this is an example of a fairly recent cyberbulicide that kind of made national headlines. I think it was so disturbing, this idea that a teenage girl could actually coach her boyfriend through a completed suicide via text. And she was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. And a little blurb from the article in the Boston Globe: from 30 miles away, she ordered him back into a truck that was filling fast with carbon monoxide, then listened as he choked to death on the fumes. Those actions, Judge Lawrence Moniz decided, led to Roy's death. She did not call the police or Mr. Roy's family, said Moniz, a juvenile court judge. She called no one. And finally, she did not issue a simple additional instruction: get out of the truck. So there are all sorts of screenshots of text messages online. I'm not sure how real or not these are, but he says to her, I promise, babe, I have to now. Like right now, she says, where do I go? And she says, you can't break a promise. Just go in a quiet parking lot or something. So, you know, obviously that's pretty extreme. This is not the kind of cyberbullying most kids are engaged in. But it's important for them to know about the potential legal ramifications of bullying, of sexting, of, you know, putting things out there. Kids are not always thinking about future consequences. We know that neurodevelopmentally their frontal lobes aren't done myelinating, and so they don't have the capacity sometimes, and so we adults in their lives need to be their surrogate frontal lobes to help them think about permanence and think about future consequences. So young people are increasingly expressing distress and specifically suicidal ideation online, social media, via text message. Here's an example of that. This was from a couple years ago. I'm taking my life away because I'm tired of who I am. Tragic final Facebook post of a student, 16, who killed himself in front of his high school class. And he wrote this sort of long post on the right. I don't know if this is going to affect people or if y'all are even going to care. I just want to say I'm taking my life away. And he goes on to sort of talk about what a burden he feels. But this is increasingly common. I guess as many of you have seen this in your practice. And it's something that I got interested in my residency in Boston, and did a retrospective chart review looking at emergency room visits at Children's Hospital for a chief complaint of suicidal ideation. And I looked at 4 years of charts, and there was a pretty steep increase over that 4-year period of kids choosing kind of media or electronic ways of communicating their suicidal thinking. So I think the days of like telling your mom or dad or leaving a note are gone. And kids are so constantly connected to their peers with social media that that's kind of the first go-to when they're feeling distressed. That might mean that it gets viewed by a very wide audience, right? When people post provocative things on Facebook, that might mean that somebody calls the kid's parents or local police, or I've seen college kids get brought in that way, like some friend across the country saw a post that calls campus security who brings the kid to the ER. But other studies have also shown that peers generally prefer to handle those kind of disclosures on their own. A lot of teenagers think, well, I can't break my friend's trust, and I can handle this, I can support them. So only about 25% of the minority of kids disclose this to an adult. And so again, it's maybe a place where we can do some psychoeducation and kind of problem solve with kids about what they might do or what they might say. Not only if they're having suicidal thoughts, but if one of their friends is, you know, how can they be a good friend and support someone who's struggling? And the answer is not just kind of keep it to yourself. Has anybody heard of this blue whale challenge? Yeah, a few nods. I hadn't heard of it until I had a kiddo in my office who was way more symptomatic than he'd been the time before. And it turned out he'd been waking himself up, setting an alarm for like 3:30 in the morning for like several days in a row, and getting up and watching these kind of scary horror movies and videos. And he had stopped by the time he came to my office, but he was pretty symptomatic when I saw him. So let me just show you the little clip on this.
A teenager commits suicide live on social media doing the Blue Whale Challenge, but is this internet trend fact or fantasy? Hey guys, it's Allie with a Hollywood Life special report, and you may have heard of the Blue Whale Challenge that asks contestants to make videos of themselves completing 50 tasks. It starts simply with watching a horror movie, but quickly escalates to things like carving words into their own skin. The final task, of course, is to kill yourself and film the whole thing, which is exactly what a 15-year-old San Antonio, Texas teen named Isaiah Gonzalez has just done. Isaiah just completed his freshman year in high school, but was found dead, hanging from a closet in his room. Next to his body was a cell phone propped up on a shoe, broadcasting the entire thing. Some say this supposed trend is just a hoax, but CNN has now reported an unidentified 16-year-old girl in Atlanta has also taken her life doing this so-called challenge. These are the first 2 deaths in the US, and authorities in places like Miami are now making videos warning kids to stay away from this deadly meme. Now, why is it called the Blue Whale Challenge? Some say it's a reference to a Russian rock song. Some say it's an allusion to whales purposely beaching themselves in order to die. No one knows for sure, but most of the clues to the game's origin lead back to Russian social media. Sky News reports at least 130 people in Russia are dead from this game already. Here's how it works. Vulnerable kids who want to play seek out a curator online with hashtags like Curator Find Me or Blue Whale Challenge. That's when these curators start coming up with challenges. A common one is asking kids to wake up at 4:30 in the morning for many days in a row, or asking them to carve symbols into their own body as signs of loyalty. We spoke exclusively to Beverly Hills psychiatrist Carol Glickman, who told us the curators look for lonely kids and try to make them tired and depressed as each task becomes more gruesome. The ultimate goal is to lead them despairingly down the path to their own death. If you know anyone participating in this challenge, tell an adult, tell a friend, and please share this video to get the word out there.
Is it me or is her affect a little offset?
Yeah.
It's just a Hollywood.
I know.
Very TMZ.
Very Hollywood, yes. So certainly that is some teen, tween aimed coverage. But it's pretty, it's pretty disturbing. So I probably scared all of you if you weren't already scared. And I think we could spend a whole hour about the pros of all of this media, and there are pros. But that would sort of run out of time for that. But I want us just to remember that this stuff is here to stay. And sort of cutting kids off may not be the best answer for parents or for clinicians. And it's not all bad. There are more and more articles coming out looking at, so this was a review article, social media and suicide prevention. And so they conclude that we might be able to reach large numbers of otherwise hard to engage individuals. These platforms may allow others to intervene following an expression of suicidal ideation. I don't think anyone's really figured this out yet, but I think we're going to hear more and more about how clinicians might use some of these technologies as supports. There are all sorts of apps. This is just one that I found online. I don't know if it's any good or not, but it's called Recovery Record Eating Disorder Management. So you can kind of track how you're doing with your eating, with exercise. There are CBT apps, there are mindfulness apps, there are positive affirmation apps. So there are kind of support apps out there, and certainly there are lots of support websites. So this is an example of a cutting and self-harm help website, how to feel better without hurting yourself. As I mentioned earlier, there's lots of suicide prevention lifelines, and Robin and others mentioned that this morning. Again, many kids are wanting to text with these and not picking up the phone. So a key takeaway point that I wanted to make today was that social media is not necessarily causally related to mental health problems, nor to risk-taking behavior in adolescents. However, vulnerable adolescents, so the ones that we all work with regularly, seem to kind of gravitate towards and prefer these unmoderated, non-professional sites and apps, which can be triggering or worsen risk-taking behavior rather than facilitate help-seeking behavior.
How do they know it's not necessarily causal?
I think just because it's such a complex association, and I don't know that the data is good enough.
Yeah, but I'm wondering what the data is that would contraindicate causality.
Well, that's not the way you work, though. You don't disprove causality, you have to prove there is causality.
Right, and you can't really do a randomized controlled trial, so it's tricky. I think the lay press sometimes takes these sorts of studies and infers causality. So there was this whole buzz a couple years back about this they sort of media coined something called Facebook depression, and psychiatrists responded and said, you can't just make up new diagnoses. Jean Berezin at MGH said, if I played the piano 8 hours a day and then I got depressed, you wouldn't call it piano depression, right? So how can we call it Facebook depression? It's just such complicated stuff. I think that's, multifactorial. But certainly I think it's fair to say that there's causation, and that for some kids it really becomes problematic. So I would encourage all of you to take a media history. We're pretty good at risk assessments and sort of like what are kids doing in their offline lives, but I would encourage you to extend that to their online lives. And I think being curious and being one down can be a really good way to learn from kids and also to join with them. So I try to teach our fellows not to start with the chief complaint, which is very off-putting when you're a 16-year-old kid who doesn't want to be sitting with a shrink to begin with. Why are you here, kid? It's much more engaging for that kid to sort of ask them about their strengths and what they like about themselves and their family, what's going well. Tell me about your social life, what kind of websites are you into? I mean, this can really kind of facilitate a relationship and start off a new patient relationship kind of on a good foot. And you're getting a sense of that kid's social life, right, and what they're into. And you can circle back to some of the risk-taking stuff later in the interview. But really just being curious. As I said, we adults can never be ahead of our children or our patients on this stuff. So if we kind of look to them respectfully to teach us, many of them are willing to do it. So these are some sample kind of questions for adolescents. I find this is probably the number one topic of conflict in families who have teenagers at home. This is the thing they are fighting the most about. So I'm always curious, like, what are the rules at your house? And I see problems both in the families who have no rules, no limits, I don't care, I don't know what my kid's doing, and the flip side, which is families who are very rigid, very controlling, that can lead to some difficult behaviors as well. So asking kids about the rules, asking them about what social media sites they use, do they connect with strangers, do they meet people offline, thinking about safety, thinking about privacy settings. Most teenagers have a very different definition of privacy than many of us would. Where are the devices at home? I think knowing whether kids have lots of screens in their room, and if they're waking up 5 times a night to their text messaging, dinging, dinging, dinging. Asking them about their favorite websites. Sometimes kids will take me to their favorite websites or their favorite YouTube video, and you can learn a lot about what kids are interested in. Asking if they're visiting some of these kind of more dangerous websites. Have your parents been concerned with your behavior? Have any of your friends been concerned? When a kid tells you, yeah, my friends are worried about me, it often can be a good hook to sort of have them sort of look at it and maybe generate a little ambivalence about, well, maybe this is actually getting me in some trouble. Have you posted things online that you've later regretted? And then similar questions for parents. We probably all work with parents who are not good digital citizens themselves, maybe not setting the best example. And so it can be a place, just kind of a safe place that's where you're sort of the moderator to have a conversation about what everybody in the family, what are the values of the family. Might they agree to, first of all, family dinner, which many of our families don't do, but a family dinner without devices and screens and people answering their text messages. So asking parents about their own use, asking them about the rules. Do you have concerns about your child's media use? Tell me about the conflicts. Has your kid gotten into any trouble at home or school or socially? Do you monitor your kids' communications? Do you follow them on Facebook or Twitter? A lot of families have the agreement, you can use Facebook, but I'm going to be a friend and I'm just going to follow in the background. I won't post, I won't embarrass you, but just know that I'm going to be monitoring. So a good rule of thumb, again, back to this point about teenagers not really thinking through future consequences. I like the grandma rule, which is if you wouldn't want grandma to see it, don't put it out there. Just think about grandma every time you're going to text or snap or tweet. I think kids, they don't sort of appreciate the permanence. And so for sort of motivated, high-achieving kids, I can usually get them hooked by, letting them know that college admissions officers Google applicants now, and employers Google applicants. And if you haven't thought about your digital footprint, you might be surprised at what's out there. And I would say that applies to all of us in this room as well. It's worth Googling yourself from time to time to see what's out there. So there's lots of good websites. Common Sense Media is a great one to know about, both for parents and for clinicians. They rate apps and movies and all sorts of things. They've got advice for preschoolers through teens. So there's lots of good resources online as well. And I think we just have a few minutes left, but I would love to hear questions, comments, any cases you've seen that seem related. Yes?
Pornography.
Oh, yeah.
I had a 12-year-old boy show me things that shocked me.
Yeah, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And it's starting to be looked at. I think it's such an icky, taboo thing that it's not really been studied very well. But I've seen data saying anywhere from like 20 to like 95% of teenage boys are accessing online pornography on a regular basis. And it's really disturbing because that's their sex ed for some of them. And so there's a lot of really negative gender roles, and there's been a few studies that have correlated high internet pornography use among teenage boys in particular with high rates of partner violence. So we're learning more about it.
Oh.
Yes, so yeah, that's a good point.
And I think that'd be interesting. I don't know, I work in public school, so I don't know, I'd have to ask our health teacher, because they cover a lot of stuff. They're interested if they were to cover that, because as parents, my wife and I have had that conversation with our kids that just so you know, what you see is not normal. I mean, first of all, we can't control everything they see, so we just have to be honest, we're seeing stuff. That's not normal. Real relationships are not like that. Real sexual encounters are not generally what you guys are seeing there. But not everyone has the opportunity to have their parents tell them that and stuff. So it's like maybe honest. So I don't see if the schools are kind of, that's a very simple message just to give, at least put out there to balance what you're seeing.
Yeah.
That's not really
I think that's a great
real.
Did everybody hear that point? Yeah.
And I too work at a middle school. I see the biggest problem with the pornography is both boys and girls, because by the way, girls are watching a lot of it too.
Yeah.
What they are starting to think is normal. Which acts and which positions and which places and everything else.
Yeah, that's a great...
Because that's what all the videos show.
Right.
So the girls think this is what I have to do.
Right. There's a great TED Talk, and I'm going to forget her name. It's called like the pornification of America.
Yeah.
It's worth watching. And pretty disturbing when they look at sort of the content of what kids are seeing and what are the gender roles and what are the scenarios, and kids walking away thinking this is normal sexual behavior, or this is what a healthy relationship looks like. It's tricky.
I noticed that you avoided the word addiction in all of this. I know that the DSM had the gaming addiction involvement, and you go to the stereotypical worst case scenario of the parental neglect because the parents are addicted to gaming. I know there's these really media covered cases in China where that's occurred. What are your thoughts on, the causation element gets a little more gray when you're talking about someone who is presumed to be addicted to gaming or internet use. I think it's hard to pull apart the mental health aspect in that experience.
Right. Yeah, I think regardless of whether it sort of made it formally into DSM, to me it feels like a very real phenomenon. So it's called compulsive internet use or internet addiction. And it's kind of defined the way substance use disorders are defined. So, excessive use, difficulty cutting back, irritability, seeking it out above other things, So when it displaces other things that kids should be doing in their lives, whether it's sleep or exercise or homework or family relationships, that's when most families and even kids can sort of get on the same page of, hey, this is a problem. And then the challenge is how do you engage them in changing that behavior, right? You need to have the kid, there's got to be some hook for the kid. And I think that, parents just taking it all away tends not to work great. So we can be kind of moderators or referees for these conversations and really get to what are your family values and what's important, and we find some middle ground here with use or some contingencies. You gotta have your homework done and you gotta turn in your cell phone at 10 p.m. or some families turn off the internet at a certain time. It's a good point though about addiction.
We had a 13-year-old child come in the other day and share with her clinician that she had done a nude Snapchat to a boy. And then after she disclosed that to her clinician, she broke down, don't tell my mother, don't tell my grandmother, all hell is going to break loose. I think it becomes difficult when you don't have the parent in the room and a child is, a minor is sharing that information. So how we handled it was at that point in time, in the moment, we did not share that information, but had a discussion with her about how other people do look at that, but that's not necessarily going to a cloud somewhere, that could be copied or, we don't know where it goes.
Oh,
Right?
school season.
We don't know where it goes.
Yeah.
That, colleges, if she wants to go to college someday, a college might, see that picture, and so on and so forth. But it's a balancing act because really, the question was, should we be telling the parent that?
Yeah, it's one of those tricky judgment calls when we're kind of thinking about risk and confidentiality in our relationship with the kid.
Trust with the kid.
Yeah, I think a kid who's really remorseful and ashamed and has done this once and can have a thoughtful conversation with you about why I'm not going to do this again. Wow, did I learn my lesson? I'm much less likely to talk with parents about that. I might encourage her to talk with parents. Or can we do it together? How do you want to do this? But the kids who are trading sex for pizza or selling videos, there's like this whole, the spectrum is pretty wide. Meeting people offline, how risky is the behavior? So at sort of that other end of the spectrum, that's where I move from, hey, do you want to do this, to like, we're going to tell mom and dad, and do you want me to do it or do you want to do it? But they're going to find out. It's like any risk assessment, I think of it sort of on that spectrum. Yeah.
Years ago, I saw an article, and I'm not one of these people that remembers names and dates in which journal it was in, but they had done some type of study with kids doing risky behaviors online and doing kind of like a profile of the child and comparing that to people with a similar profile, like, I don't know, the 70s or something. And basically what they were saying is the kind of kid that's going to be looking into risky behaviors hasn't really changed. It's just this is one more way for risky behaviors. And I think this one was specifically around meeting the dirty old man offline kind of thing. There was this time we went through this whole fear that there was, fat old men in their underwear sitting around posing as 14-year-old boys,
right.
luring these girls. And it really wasn't happening successfully,
Yeah.
And what that article was saying is there are teens that are going to be vulnerable to very risky behaviors, and the computer doesn't make them that way. It's just another way now. Whereas when I was in high school, you knew which dugout you had to go to during the school dance to have a better chance of getting some.
Right.
Very more ideas.
Yeah, the tasks of adolescence
but it's not
aren't
just the
different.
ideas, it's are they following through on the ideas, are they doing it?
Right.
Because there was huge publicity about 13 Ways.
Huge, yeah.
You would have expected if it was going to be as horrible as everyone feared it was, we were going to see this blatant, obvious spike in at least attempts.
Mm-hmm. I would guess somebody's looking at that, but it just happens. So I'd be curious to see what comes. Yeah, but I think it is a good point. I think a teenager's hard, right? And the tasks are. It always has been, right?
My dad told me, thank God I'm not a teenager like you are today. Life was so different. I'm in my 50s now. Every set of teenagers have their own challenges and differences.
Right. It's just a little complex in today's media-saturated world.
I think what's really striking, like when I talk to the kids, is they don't have any escape. So it's so intrusive, right? So, you know, I'd say to them, you know, when I was your age, you had a bad day at school, you let the answering machine pick up. You didn't pick up the phone.
What's an answering machine?
I know. You know, so like the kids would be like, I just can't get away.
Right. Yeah, they're bombarded.
And I say, make your mom the heavy. Say, my mom took my phone away.
Yeah.
Can't
Yeah, that can work well.
Yeah, and they go, oh, okay. But like they just can't get away from it. And I can remember I was a school social worker when instant messaging came out. And all of a sudden the bullying was anonymous. And I was at South Portland High School, and it was all the assistant principal myself dealt with was bullying via instant message. And it was done on school laptops, but outside of school time. I mean, it was very tricky. It was a whole different realm. We weren't quite sure how to deal with it. Yeah, it was brutal though.
Well, right now in the state of Maine, because all middle schools get a computer, if they are bullied online, and it comes up on their school computer, it's not the school's responsibility.
Yeah.
Even though it happened at 4 a.m. on Saturday morning.
And sometimes, you know, the school resource officer, if there is one getting involved, local police are doing.
But this was new at the time, you know?
Yeah.
It was really 15, 16 years ago.
So we are over time. Thank you all for coming, and if you have any more questions or comments, I'd welcome them up here.